Hello friends, so today's video is going to be a list of the books I'm hoping to pick up in the month of February. I'm just going to jump right into it. First, I, as usual, plan to pick up a lot of the new releases. There's a couple of sequels in particular that I'm really excited about. So A Tyranny of Faith, this is one that is a second book in a series. It would be the sequel to Justice of Kings, and I really enjoyed Justice of Kings. It's quite meandering, and it is told in a I'm going to tell you my life story type of setup where the main character is the protege to an important figure. A lot of people thought that the story was going to be from the perspective of that important figure, but instead you are seeing somebody who is observing them, who is their protege, who is following in their footsteps, so to speak, but then also kind of is critical of them and butts heads with them and is also at the same time trying to learn from them. And I actually really enjoyed this. I wasn't initially expecting it, so I was like a lot of other people, but when I found that to be the case, it made me like it more because the setup is that we follow, essentially you follow, even though he's not the main perspective, Sir Conrad von Valt, and I've said many times that he is judge, jury, detective, and executioner all in one, which I had a feeling that the story would examine should an individual have that much power, but I feel like by having his protege be the perspective that you're getting the story from, it has a very organic way of questioning whether any one individual should have that much power. I do think if you're a plot-driven reader, though, this one might bore you a little bit because it is kind of just them going from one place to the next and then them trying to deal with crime, you could say, in certain areas and trying to figure out why certain things are happening. But I found it to be really interesting. I did like the way in which the morality was questioned. And I'm really excited about this sequel because you know that the woman, obviously she's the one telling you the story, so you're like, okay, she makes it out of it. But what's going to happen to everybody else? And you're not really sure, but it feels like the stakes are very high, so I can't wait for this sequel. Another sequel I'm excited about is Castles in Their Bones. Stardust in Their Veins. Castles in Their Bones is the first one. And this first one follows these three sisters whose mother has trained them from the time they were born to be married off to these other kingdoms, and they are supposed to manipulate their various different husbands, the three of them, to kind of push them into going to war with one another, and the specific ways in which they've been educated in manipulation is specific to whoever's kingdom they're marrying into and who they are marrying. But of course, there are some unforeseen obstacles that get in their way. The reason that the mother is trying to push them to do this is because she wants them to all be weakened. And then when they're all weakened, she wants to come in and take them all for herself and then become empress. That's the grand plan. But some things get in the way and they have to try and figure out how they're going to get through these unforeseen circumstances. And so I really liked the maneuverings of the characters. They also don't have the easiest means of communication with each other. So if one thing goes wrong, you as the reader are like, oh no. But then you go to the other characters and they're still going forward with what they think the plan is, but you're like, okay, but I know that things have to change because of this over here. And so I just really thought it was a fun way to do political fantasy. I won't go too in depth with some of the other new releases I'm hoping to pick up. I did do a February anticipated releases video, so I'll have that linked if you would like to hear more details because I go through the synopses for them. But The Crane Husband is one that I'm quite interested in. It sounds strange but interesting. It seems almost folklore-like and very much like you're being told the story where reality seems to not be centered. Like you don't have a firm grasp on what's actually happening. Maybe it feels like it's going to be very symbolic, but that's one of the things I'll find out. And then also I'm looking at my notes. The Magician's Daughter. Both of these have kind of a profile, I think, on the covers, so then I have to remember which one's which. And then when I think through the covers, I'm like, well, The Crane Husband has one that looks more like a crane. But I get the two mixed up a little bit in my head, but they're not the same at all. The Magician's Daughter, I think, is following somebody who has kind of been secluded to this very small island, and supposedly magic used to exist, or at least used to be much stronger, and then there's a individual that the main character lives with who seems to know much more about what's happened to magic, and our main character wants to find out for herself. So it sounds really interesting. I think it might be a little bit atmospheric based off the fact that within the synopsis it seems like there's a pretty good amount of emphasis placed on the setting, and so I'm really excited for both of these. I think they're both going to be great. And then also A Day of Fallen Night. I was debating whether I wanted to pick this one up or Priory of the Orange Tree first. Priory of the Orange Tree. But Priory of the Orange Tree, I think I'm going to actually read later. A Day of Fallen Night, while it is a prequel to some degree, it apparently exists so far before Priory of the Orange Tree that it's not like it's all that directly related. It's more of kind of in Priory of the Orange Tree, the lore is what you're exploring. The history is what you're exploring in A Day of Fallen Night. So I think I'm going to start fresh with this new one and then eventually go to Priory. And I did try Priory a long time ago. I did not DNF it because I was hating it or anything like that. At the time, I'd been traveling a fair amount, and I just felt like I wasn't retaining what I was reading, and so I put it down, but it's one that I've always been open to picking up again. So I do plan to do that at some point, probably not in the month of February because it's a large book, and A Day of Fallen Night seems to be a large book as well, but I am very excited for both of these. There are some other new releases that I will try to get around to, but those are probably taking highest priority. Now moving into some things that are not new releases. So, The Crane Husband is written by the same author who wrote The Girl Who Drank the Moon. That one is an award-winning novel. I believe it's technically considered middle grade, but it's one that I've wanted to pick up for a long time. I have it. I've had a copy for a long time. And this is kind of the nudge for me that I want to read this one and The Crane Husband. I want to see the difference in the author's writing style, not just from years apart, but also to see the difference between writing a middle grade story and writing an adult fantasy story. I think that'll be really interesting to compare and contrast. Next, we have Kindred by Octavia Butler. I mentioned for some of the books that I really am excited to read, or at least certain authors that I'm really excited to read more from, that Octavia Butler was one of them. Parable of the Sower, I really I feel like enjoyed is not the right word, and if you've read it, you know why. I mean, it's kind of almost apocalyptic, but not because there's some meteor that hits Earth or because of atomic bombs, but rather because humankind is just awful in that book. And so you're watching a character try to survive. But it is very heavy and terrible things happen. The things that people are committing on a day-to-day basis in front of everyone, it's chaos and it's terrible. But this character gives you some sense of hope. But I was like, I don't know if I want to jump right into its sequel. It wouldn't be jumping right into it because I read this early in 2022. But I didn't know if that was the next Octavia Butler I wanted to pick up. I thought, maybe I can pick up something else. And so I asked all of you, where do you think I should go with Octavia Butler's works next? And I mentioned, I think I want to read Kindred, but let me know if you have more insight into her works and think a different book would be a good direction. And a lot of you said Kindred would be a great one to pick up. I also plan to continue my read-through of Way of Kings for the Cosmere read-along, so that's just going to be it's a long book, and I'm trying to take my time with it, so I'll be continuing to read that one. Because the month of February has Valentine's Day, I figured I would try a couple of fantasy romances. I do want to say, if you have any contemporary romance book recommendations, I do like reading them from time to time. Obviously, I'm a fantasy fan, so I always am like, but where are like the cool creatures and the magic? But a good contemporary romance is still enjoyable. So if you have recommendations, feel free to let me know. I've read Emily Henry's books, I've read Talia Hibbert's books, but as for fantasy romance, I had picked up Paladin's Grace last year by T. Kingfisher, and I found it very amusing, which is not surprising because I like her humor. And I enjoyed the fact that both of the characters were adults who had had previous life experiences that influenced their behavior, their mindsets, and the fact that they can't just drop everything to be with each other. Like, they have other obligations and other things that they're working through or continue to have to dedicate time to. And so finding time to fit each other in, I just felt like it was more relatable than some of the other fantasy romance I've picked up, which is basically just pining constantly. So I did like Paladin's Grace, so long story short, I plan to pick up the next book in that series of standalones. It's called Paladin's Strength, I believe is book 2. And then after that we have, I'm never going to remember this full title, so I have to look, The Serpent and the Wings of Night. I will remember eventually, but this is one that I've been seeing around, and I've seen romance readers specifically also say, I really liked this fantasy romance, it really surprised me. And then people who typically read fantasy romance have been saying, I really like this fantasy romance. And then I think I saw Pyrrha talk about it as well, and she quite liked it. So I'm like, okay, that's a lot of different people that are saying they really like this one, so let's give it a try. So I think I'm going to try to fit that one in February. Also, at the time I'm filming this, I have not yet completed the Arrows trilogy by Mercedes Lackey, but there's a chance I will finish that trilogy in the month of January, and if I do, I want to continue on with the World of Valdemar, but if I haven't, then I plan to continue on with the Arrows trilogy. But regardless, something by Mercedes Lackey. I loved the first book so much. I loved it so much. It's a new favorite. So I have high hopes for the rest of the trilogy, and I have high hopes for the rest of this world. I'm really excited, and it's always such a good feeling when you read something and you love it, and then there's so many other books by that author that you can pick up. Because, I mean, not to, make any author feel bad or anything, but it always is like, dang it, when you read something you love, you're like, what else have they written? And there's nothing else. So it's so exciting when you find one that you can't wait. I'm repeating myself. But I'm also excited because I mention my local used bookstores all the time when I do book hauls and such, but they are really good, specifically Bookman's is really good about having old works, old fantasy works, or older fantasy works. And I'm sure I've seen a lot of Mercedes Lackey. I actually have a couple that I've picked up, so I'm like ready to jump in and just dive into this world. I'm so excited. I hope I love the rest as much as I love that first one. But anyway, I'm sure I will probably add in some other things. I also did not mention the manga that I'm planning to pick up, or the comics. I have my to be read, watched, and played over on my other channel, so I'll have that linked if you'd like to see what video games I want to play through, what shows I want to watch, what manga I want to read. I'll have that over there. But anyway, thanks so much for watching. I hope you have a lovely rest of your day, and I'll see you later. Bye.